His Excellency, the President, the District Governor, Jerome Rajendram, the representative of the International President, Per Hoyan, the Conference Chair, Kumar Sundararaja, past International President K.R. Ravindran, who gave me such a fulsome introduction, for which I thank him. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for inviting me to this convention and giving me the opportunity to come back to Colombo 43 years since I was here last. This is the first time I've traveled all over the world, but for whatever reason, I never had a chance to come back here. So I'm very happy to be here. My family also has a long association with Sri Lanka. My father was a student at the Trinity College, Kandy, as were many of my relatives. And I think there's still a park in Kandy named after my grandfather, P.T. Rajan. I'm also happy to reassociate with the Rotary movement. In my youth, I was a member of Interact and Rotaract clubs, and I get invited fairly often to Rotary events in India. And I always say that as good as governments need to be, and as much responsibility as there is on us, the level of granularity, dedication, focus that institutions like the Rotary can bring and the impact they can have cannot be replicated by the government. So we see individuals like you, organizations like yours, as vital partners in providing services to the people. When I was asked to come down, the governor asked me to pick a topic. And he suggested a few, and I said, well, since I'm the Minister for Technology, why don't I talk a little bit about how I think technology can benefit in delivering better governance, improving the quality of our democracy, of any democracy. And so that's what I tried to do very briefly. I realize the President is here, so I don't want to talk for too long. But one of the things that I feel, having spent an extensive banking and professional career in many global roles and operating in many countries, is that the very fabric of democracy is being torn in different ways in different countries, but the notion that we could take a lot of things for granted is being diluted. And the strength of our institutions, the independence of their functioning, the notion of level playing fields, the focus on increasing equity and access, all of these seem to be getting eroded in the pursuit of, in many cases, strongmen and authoritarianism, decaying of institutions, reversal of decades-long patterns or judgments. And this is not in one country, I'm saying around the world. And so I've had a bit of deep think because I've had the opportunity to serve in corporate offices. I've been an opposition member of the assembly. I've been in a couple of different ministries. And it occurred to me that really the notion of democracy, if viewed from a capital markets or a free economy or a capitalist model of economy, there are a few functions that democracy should deliver or that administrators should perform well for it to be a functional democracy. We should have a relatively equitable society. We shouldn't let the rich get too rich. We shouldn't let the poor fall too far behind. We should have a relatively level playing field. We shouldn't allow crony capitalists to take control of the system. We shouldn't allow moats to be built that prevent innovation or access. We should facilitate enterprise and innovation by not having too much red tape, not having too many rent-seeking bureaucrats to have other kind of decays in the system. We should ensure social harmony the rule of law, a relatively calm society, so that people can go about their commercial and entrepreneurial activities without fear for their personal safety. We should try to continuously improve the quality of life of our citizens through better public services, health, education, roads, water, sanitation, housing. And we should try to protect the weakest and those most in need at some point in their life when they reach unemployment, when they have a health problem. This should be the goals of an equitable and just society, one that we can call a functional democracy, and one that should therefore continue to support free markets, capitalism as a way of economic development. But if you look around the world, such ideas have been defeated by several developments. The first, I would say, is surging globalization. This wave of globalization, we've certainly had eras of globalization before the Roman Empire, the age of colonial rule. But this hyper-globalized age has seen both huge increases in global economic output as well as huge increases in intra-country and across-country inequalities. In particular, we have seen such powerful corporations and mega corporations evolve, both within a country's economy and globally, where the winner-take-all agglomeration results in the capitalists capturing the system of democracy through lobbying, through grants, through money, through influence. We have seen increasing scale and complexity in the nature of administration. If you take a country like India, our population has more than tripled since the days of independence. And that has brought with it a lot of problems, both structural and operational. Structural, for example, an average representative of a state assembly used to represent 30 or 40,000 people. Now, I represent about 230,000 people. So the ratio of voters to the representative, and therefore the question of access and accountability, has fundamentally changed. And that has led to some decay, in my opinion. Also, the complexity of administering economies. Our economy in Tamil Nadu used to be 80 billion or so about 12 years ago. It's about 350 billion now, US dollars. That brings with it a lot of added complexity. And in fact, most governments around the world have not invested enough in their own capabilities, in their own infrastructure, in their own technology, in their own systems to match. I think it's universally accepted now that the advent of social media has led to great extent of polarization of views because of the ability to tailor messages to what people want to hear and create echo chambers that lead to stratified content and directed messaging which tears societies apart and forces politicians to start covering the edges rather than the middle. And I would say, as we have seen in all countries, certainly you have seen it here, the toxic combination of self-serving politicians, of venal bureaucrats, of power-drunk judiciary, and the combination of all these has led to some really bad outcomes across all countries. In this context, how can technology really help? And in my limited experience, I thought about 6 or 7 things, and so I'll talk about the positives now. The first thing that technology and computerization and digitization can do is improve comprehension and comprehensiveness. When I was an opposition member of the Assembly and a member of the Public Accounts Committee, I found it hard to get a number for how many public sector undertakings, boards, welfare associations, actual corporations the state of Tamil Nadu was running. Not even the CAG could tell me an exact number. It wasn't 832, it wasn't 645, it was some hundreds of such entities. Without computerization, without digitization, without any kind of database, we don't even know what the scope of government is. Much less do we understand how all the parts fit together and how they work. So we are pushing now in Tamil Nadu what many people have done, which is for a complete digitization and enumeration. What is it that the government does? Where all does it do it? How does it do it? Who all exist? Why do they exist? What do they do? The second thing that technology can do, and this is hugely helpful, particularly in the old British colonies, is provide continuity. By the nature of democracy, those of us who are elected stand for election on a regular basis. Sometimes we come back, many times we don't. Almost nobody sustains for more than 10 or 15 years in a position. When you don't have permanent people in any post, and that's certainly true of bureaucrats, whether it's at the top administration or at any level, everybody's being transferred, rotated. There is no institutional memory that is retained. Every time there's a new government, somebody has to go and research what happened last time. There is no natural continuity that exists like in a corporation that says these were the 50 decisions we have taken on this topic over the last 30 years, and therefore, were it to come up again, this is what we should reference. And if there isn't any memory, there is no robustness. I served on the GST Council of our country, after it was formed for 2 years. And when we had to take up complex issues, we found contradictory judgments of high courts and supreme courts related to the notion of what is betting, what is not betting, what is gambling, what is not gambling, what is a game of chance, what is a game of skill. Over 40 or 50 years, there were so many judgments that contradicted each other. There was no robustness to a process which said that once a precedent is set, everything should continue either along it, or if it's overturned, from then on there's a new reality. There were 50 realities. So, without this continuity, without this robustness, because the records are not digitized, because they're not tagged, because they're not continuous, any paper file system like the leftover British system is going to lead to a lot of problems which can be eliminated were we to do this. Sunlight is always the best disinfectant, and in many cases, processes that are not trackable, auditable, or reviewable because there exists a digital trail end up having less than good efficiency and less than great transparency. Any number of you may have instances, I hope that Sri Lanka is better than India, that when you go to a government office and need a certificate or need a license or need a permit, you know what the experience is like. But we don't know. I'm the minister. I have no idea who came. I know who was issued were I to go search the file. But I don't know how many people came and were not issued because there's no process that records what has happened independent of the outcome. Transparency, online work, recording of these things would help a lot. There is no consistency without a digital record or without a computerized history. Everybody's treatment is different. Everybody's approach is different. The same individual may make different decisions at different times. We have no way of knowing any of these things. I have found in my limited time in the IT ministry that were we to digitize and make services online, application for certificates, for death, for your community certificate, for an income certificate, for a driving license, for access to the public distribution system, we find that not only does it get faster, not only does it get more consistent, it actually provides a more reliable and predictable outcome. So what we have done, we used to have about 7,000 or 8,000 of these electronic service centers where people could go and get their work done without having to go to buildings, meet officers. We have now scaled that up to 30,000 centers, and our ambition is to make sure that every urban citizen will have one center within a kilometer of where they live, and every rural citizen will have one within a few kilometers of where they live. In fact, when I was finance minister, I was reluctant to fund the building of any new government offices, including my own Department of Treasury. I said, from now on, we don't want the people to come to the government. We want the government to be accessible 24/7 online, either from their homes or through electronic service centers. And if they are not capable of operating online, we must find a way to get the government to the people. So, for example, for things like non-communicable diseases, medication, for remedial education, for pension life certificates. For all of these, the government of Tamil Nadu in the last 3 years, we have designed the services to go to the citizen's home rather than have the citizens come to the primary health center or the school, or to go somewhere and get a certificate that shows I'm alive, therefore please pay me my pension. I think that these were all probably plausible at any time in the last 30 or 40 years. In fact, technology has made huge strides, and for an ex-consultant like me, for somebody who studied in the US, these kinds of systems and applications have been around for decades. But what we are at now is the interface of something very, very different. As we see more and more artificial intelligence, which basically means that you have relatively unlimited volumes of data with relatively unlimited computing power, and that you don't have to pre-program only X number of scenarios, but the machine is capable of adapting and reacting and understanding almost anything it is asked within a certain context. Or as I used to say, back when I did my PhD, we used to try and design interfaces so that they would be easier for people to use, because we knew that people couldn't keep up with the complexity of computers. Now the hottest jobs in the valley are teaching computers how people think. Not professionals, not scientists, not programmers, but common people. How do they think, and therefore how can I teach this machine to think like a person thinks? This, I think, is the most promising frontier. And what I have been saying in the last few months is that when we are able to process the request of, let's say, an 80-year-old widow who is eligible for a pension from the government of Tamil Nadu on a voice call to a center without human intervention, and make sure that her payment is sent to her bank account without any officer of the government touching it, then we will have reached the right level of AI application and make sure that the government is truly compassionate and accessible equitably to all people, irrespective of their means, their education, their ability to use technology, their access to smartphones, etc. So I think this is a very interesting era. There's a long way to go, but sometimes there are inflection points when you can see the value of 10 years of change, or the impact of 10 years of change in a year or two. I, for one, in the process of government, of administration, of providing the outcomes that democracy is supposed to provide, I think we are at one of those points now. I'm not sure it's going to happen very quickly, because the amount of computing power, the amount of data that is parsable, that is taggable, is going to take a lot of time to develop. The computing power is still highly restricted. There's only a near monopoly. There's only almost one person who can make the chips that are needed for this. But in my expectation, within the next decade, all of these should be substantively improved, and you'll find that what is now the cutting edge, which is accessible only to the few who can stand in line and get the NVIDIA chips at the right sequence and have a few $100 million to run computing power and have access to large volumes of data, I think that this will become completely transformed, particularly because by the nature of governments, in every society, in every country, the biggest owner of data is the government. It's just not in a usable form, but the government has data about everybody and everything in their life, from their birth to their graduation, to their employment, to their taxes, to their health, to their death. So were we to pass this data into digitally usable volumes, and were the access to power, that is electric power, to power these machines, and access to the right kinds of machines become a bit more ubiquitous as opposed to exclusive as it is now, we will find, I think, that this is the era where we can really use technology to do a step change in the quality of administration, the quality of governance, and therefore in re-stabilizing or re-establishing the tenets of democracy that I think are at the heart of all our constitutions. So, with that, let me conclude my address. Let me congratulate the organizers of this event for bringing everybody together. Let me wish all of you a wonderful day of camaraderie, of interesting discussions, of friendship, of happiness. Thank you very much.